The last message from Earth arrived 4 minutes after Earth stopped existing, and Commander Adiz Okoro did not know that yet. She stood in the observation ring of Outpost Ilion, a research station bolted to the frozen crust of a rogue moon that had no name, only a catalog number nobody used anymore. Beneath her boots, 70 meters of ice separated her from the reason the outpost existed at all. A structure the size of a mountain, buried and dark, that the survey teams had started calling the tomb. The message on her console was garbled, half-eaten by static, stitched together from 3 relay satellites that had gone silent one after another over the last 6 hours. Cannot hold the line. All fleets converge on Sol. God, it's not stopping, it's not. Then nothing. Not silence. Nothing. The channel itself was gone, as if someone had reached out and switched off the part of the universe that carried the signal. Adiz set down her cup of recycled coffee very carefully, because her hands had started to shake, and she did not want anyone on her crew to see that yet. "Ren," she said, "get me anything. Anything at all." Lieutenant Ren Vasquez was already moving, fingers flying across a bank of receivers that had been designed to listen for the faint, ancient hum of the buried structure below them, not for the death cries of a species. He tried Earth control. He tried the Third Fleet. He tried the automated beacon on Titan Station itself, the moon their solar system's largest gas giant satellite had lent its name to, and which had in turn lent its name to the thing under the ice, because the first tomb humanity ever found had been discovered there, and everyone since had inherited the word. Nothing answered. "There's a carrier wave," Ren said finally, voice flat with the particular calm of a man refusing to feel something. "No data on it. It's not talking. It's just there, steady, coming from where Sol should be. Should be." The frequencies shifted, Commander. Redshifted, like something enormous is moving away from us. Fast. Right where the sun is supposed to be broadcasting from. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the thing he wasn't going to say out loud unless she made him. "Say it," she told him. "I think Sol's gone dark," Ren said. "I think something ate the signal." Behind them, the rest of the 11-person research crew had gone quiet. Dr. Priya Kaur, the outpost's senior xenoarchaeologist, stood in the doorway with a data slate still glowing in her hand. Forgotten. Master Sergeant Tomas Boone, the ranking Marine and the only person on Ilion who had actually seen combat, had already unslung his rifle from its wall mount without seeming to notice he'd done it. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Outside the viewport, the black sky held its usual scatter of indifferent stars. Then the outpost's threat sensor chimed, a small, polite sound utterly unsuited to what it meant, and a red contact bloomed on the tactical display. Something enormous, decelerating hard, for hours out and closing. Adiz looked at it, and understood that whatever had happened to Earth was now coming for them. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 6 hours earlier, on the other side of human space, the war had still made a kind of sense. Fleet Admiral Dorian Achebe had commanded the defense of 11 systems in 11 years and had never lost more than a handful of ships in a single engagement. He was not an overconfident man. He had simply never been given reason for doubt. Humanity's enemy, a coalition of 3 allied species that called themselves, in the closest human translation, the Unmaking, had been probing the border for a generation. Skirmishes, raids, the occasional lost colony, mourned and avenged. Nobody, least of all Achebe, expected all 3 of the Unmaking's battle fleets to arrive at Sol simultaneously, in numbers that dwarfed every estimate fleet intelligence had ever produced, escorting something that did not appear on any threat classification humanity possessed. It was not a ship. It was not strictly a weapon. It moved like neither. Sensor techs on the forward pickets described it, in their last transmissions, as a wound in space that things fell into and did not come out of. Achebe's Third Fleet, 400 warships, the accumulated pride of 2 centuries of shipbuilding, engaged it at the edge of the asteroid belt because that was where doctrine said to make a stand, and because there was nowhere else left to make one. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. In the 9th minute, Achebe watched his flagship sister ship, the Dreadnought Meridian, simply stop existing on the tactical plot, along with the 8,000 people aboard it, and understood with total clarity that he was not fighting a war anymore. He was watching the closing chapter of one that had already been decided somewhere he'd never been invited to. In the 11th minute, someone, history would never agree on who, gave the order to fall back to Earth and make a final stand in high orbit over the cradle, because if humanity was going to lose everything, it was going to lose it there, in sight of home, rather than scattered across the dark. It did not help. Earth's orbital defense grid, the densest concentration of firepower the species had ever built, held for 19 minutes against a force that outnumbered it 8-1 and possessed weapons that made a mockery of every shield humanity had ever designed. Achebe's own ship went down in the 16th minute of that stand. He did not know how the last 3 minutes went. Nobody who could have told him survived to file a report. What was known, pieced together later from the scraps of data that outran the destruction, carried on lightspeed signals that took hours or days to reach the edges of human territory, was this: the enemy did not occupy Earth. It did not offer terms. It burned the orbital infrastructure, cratered the major cities in strikes precise enough to suggest they were not aiming for the population but for something specific beneath it, and then, having apparently found what it was looking for or confirmed its absence, it left. 3.1 billion people. Every shipyard. Every archive that had not been mirrored off-world. Every government. Every capital. Every home Adiz Okoro had ever had reason to miss. Gone in the time it took a duty shift to end. Adiz had 11 people, one buried structure of unknown purpose, 4 hours, and a decision to make. "Talk to me, Priya," she said, once the crew had assembled in the outpost's cramped command module. "What is the tomb, actually? Not the survey brochure version. What do we know?" Dr. Kaur pulled up the scan data. 3 years of careful, patient, criminally underfunded work, and threw it onto the main display. The structure beneath their feet resolved into a shape that was not quite a ship and not quite a building. A lens-shaped mass nearly 2 kilometers across, its surface engraved with a language nobody had translated, its interior riddled with chambers that returned readings no instrument could fully explain. "We don't know what it is," Priya admitted. "We know it's old, older than anything else we found, by a margin that stopped making sense to me a year ago. We know there are 11 others like it scattered through explored space, all dormant, all silent, all built by whoever made them to survive essentially anything. And we know," she hesitated, "that every time humanity has gotten close to actually opening one, something has gone catastrophically wrong for us." "Define catastrophically," said Boone. "The Vesta dig went dark 8 years ago. The Kepler-22 outpost lost contact 11 months before that. Both were tomb sites. Both times, fleet blamed enemy raids and moved on, because nobody wanted to ask the other question. Which is whether the unmaking isn't attacking us at random," Priya said. "Whether they're following us. Whether every tomb site we've ever touched has drawn them in, and we've spent 30 years calling it bad luck." The command module was very quiet. Ren broke it. "Then this is the worst possible place for us to be sitting right now." "Maybe," Adiz said. "Or maybe it's the only place worth sitting." She looked at the tactical plot, at the red contact grinding closer, and made herself think instead of feel, because feeling was a door she could not afford to open yet. "If they're following the tombs," she said slowly, "then Earth wasn't burned at random either. They went there because something in our system or in our history or in what we'd found told them to. And if that's true, then this outpost isn't a footnote. It's the last card left on the table." "Commander," Boone said carefully, "with respect, we have 11 people and a research station with no weapons that matter. Whatever's coming out masses us by a factor I don't even want to calculate. Running isn't cowardice. It's arithmetic." "I know the arithmetic, Sergeant." Adiz met his eyes. "I also know we have no fleet to run to, no Earth to run home to if the redshift reading is right. Every ship we send out that door is running toward nothing, with an enemy behind it that outpaces our fastest engine by a factor when clocked at better than 2-1. She let that sit. "So the question isn't whether we can escape. It's what we do with the 4 hours we have before that stops being a question at all." Priya was watching her carefully. "You think we can wake it up?" "I think," Adiz said, "that we're about to find out whether 30 years of bad luck was actually a warning. And I think if we run, we'll never know, and neither will anyone else, because there won't be anyone else left to ask. ****. The descent into the tomb took 90 minutes they didn't have and could not skip. The outpost's excavation shaft, a narrow bore through 70 meters of ancient ice reinforced with 3 years of careful engineering, led down to a service chamber the survey team had mapped but never breached. A threshold, Priya called it, sealed behind a door that had defeated every drill, laser, and diplomatic scan they'd ever aimed at it. They had 6 people in the descent team: Adiz, Priya, Ren, Boone, and 2 junior techs, Nakamura and Ferreira, who had volunteered before anyone finished asking for volunteers. The other 5 stayed topside, running the outpost sensors and buying whatever warning time they could. The threshold door was 11 meters tall, black, seamless, and covered edge to edge in the same untranslated script that marked the tomb's outer hull. Priya's scanner had spent 3 years failing to find a way through it. She spent the descent studying data she'd already memorized, because it gave her hands something to do besides shake. "It's not locked," she said when they reached it. "It's asleep. There's a difference. A lock keeps something out. This is waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Ren asked. "I don't know. I've had 3 years and 11 people and a budget line item fleet kept trying to cut. I have theories, not answers." "Give me the best one," Adiz said. Priya looked at the door for a long moment. "The engraving pattern repeats in clusters of 13. Every dormant tomb we've surveyed shows the same clustering, and 13 keeps showing up in ways that feel deliberate, not decorative, structural. I think it's a recognition pattern. I think this door isn't a door in the way we mean the word. I think it's a question, and it's been asking the same question for longer than our species has existed, and nobody's ever answered it, because nobody's ever had a reason to try hard enough. And if we get it wrong, then it stays a door," Priya said. "Best case. And worst case." Priya didn't answer that one, and nobody made her. Adiz studied the panel Priya had rigged into the threshold 3 years ago, a crude interface built to receive the recognition pattern in whatever form the tomb builders had encoded it, patched together from equipment never designed for the job because nothing designed for the job existed. Above them, 70 meters up, the outpost sensors reported the enemy formation 40 minutes out and decelerating into attack posture. "We don't have time for the careful version," Adiz said. "Priya, give me your best guess and let's find out if guessing is enough." It was not enough, not at first. Priya fed the pattern into the interface, clusters of 13 pulses, timed and spaced according to 3 years of theory built on scraps, and the door did nothing. No light, no sound, no change in the ancient, patient stillness of the chamber. "Again," Adiz said. "Commander, if the pattern's wrong, running it repeatedly won't." "Again, Priya." She ran it again. Nothing. Above them, Boone's comm crackled with a transmission relayed down from the surface team. "Contact 31 minutes, still decelerating, weapon signature consistent with orbital bombardment package." "They're not here to talk," Boone said grimly. Ren, who had spent the descent staring at the scrolling data from Priya's 3 years of survey work rather than at the door itself, suddenly straightened. Wait, run it again but slower. Half speed." "Why?" "Because the clustering repeats in 13ths, but the intervals between clusters aren't even. I've been staring at this for 10 minutes and it's not random. It's a heartbeat. Priya, your interface is running the pattern at a fixed clock speed. What if the thing on the other side of that door isn't measuring time in seconds? What if it's measuring it in something else? Something biological. Something patient." Priya's hands were already moving, recalculating, and Adiz felt something in her chest that was not quite hope, because hope felt like too dangerous a thing to allow herself yet, but was at least adjacent to it. 24 minutes, Boone reported. "I need 3, Priya said, not looking up. "You don't have 3. "Then I need 3 anyway, Sergeant, because I don't have a faster idea." Adiz crossed to the interface, put a hand briefly on Priya's shoulder. Not to hurry her, but because it was the only thing she had to offer, and said, "Take the 3 minutes. We'll hold the door." Nobody asked what that meant because everybody understood there was nothing on the other side of that sentence except 6 people and whatever weapons Boone had been able to carry down a mining shaft. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The enemy did not send its full force to the surface of a nameless rogue moon for a research outpost of 11 people. It sent a fraction, 3 dropcraft, perhaps 40 soldiers by Boone's estimate, watching the outpost's external feeds from the excavation chamber, because a fraction was, by any reasonable calculation, more than sufficient. The topside crew held for 6 minutes against that, which was 6 minutes longer than Boone privately expected, and it cost them everything they had. The last transmission from the surface was Nakamura's sister, Dr. Ellen Nakamura, reporting the outer hab breached, no further defense possible, and then the channel doing what the channel from Seoul had done hours before. Not going silent, but going gone. In the threshold chamber 70 meters down, Priya Core ran the recognition pattern a third time, at a quarter of its original speed. Each cluster of 13 pulses stretched into something that took nearly a full minute to complete, patient in a way nothing about the last 24 hours had been. On the second cluster, the door woke up. It did not open like a door. The black surface simply ceased to be a surface, dissolving from the edges inward like ice giving way to water, and what lay beyond was not a chamber but a space that the human eye struggled to hold a fixed shape for, vast, and lit from no visible source, and utterly, overwhelmingly silent in a way that pressed on the ears like depth. "Go," Adiz said, because there was no time left to be afraid of what they'd found. "Go, go, go." They went. Behind them, from the excavation shaft, came the sound of the enemy breaching the outer chamber, the same patient, methodical violence that had ended Earth's orbital defenses in 19 minutes now turned on 6 people and a hole in the ice. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What waited inside the tomb was not a weapon in any sense the word usually carried, and it was not a mind exactly, though it was capable of something enough like thought that the distinction stopped mattering within seconds of contact. Priya would later describe it, in the handful of fragmentary reports that survived what came next, as a library that had decided to wake up. Run, less poetically, called it the last will and testament of a species that had seen this exact moment coming and had spent unimaginable spans of time preparing for it. It communicated the only way it could, given that no shared language existed. Directly, urgently, through the interface Priya's improvised connection had opened, in a flood of information that arrived faster than any of them could consciously process and that their own minds, afterward, arranged into something like understanding. The builders of the tombs had fought a war very much like this one, against an enemy very much like the one now breaching the outer chamber, and had lost it not through weakness but through the same mistake humanity had just made. Standing and fighting where the enemy expected them to stand, on ground the enemy had already mapped for ruin. In the last years of their war, understanding that defeat was coming and refusing to let it be final, they had built these tombs, seeded through space, each one holding a fragment of what they had been and, more importantly, a fragment of what they had learned, including, at the very core of each structure, something the recognition pattern in the door had been designed to test for. Not a weapon that could win the war outright. The builders had been honest with whoever eventually found them. Nothing could do that, not against an enemy this patient, this thorough, this willing to erase entire civilizations rather than risk their return. What the tomb held instead was a method, a way of fighting that did not depend on matching the enemy ship for ship, gun for gun, because that fight could never be won. It depended on understanding that the enemy's overwhelming force was built for exactly one kind of war, the kind where a species stood and made its final defense in the open, over its homeworld, its capital, its cradle, because that was where its will to keep fighting was rooted, and breaking that will was the entire purpose of the campaign. The tomb's gift, if it could be called that, was smaller and stranger than a superweapon. A signal keyed to the recognition pattern that could be sent from any tomb to every other tomb still dormant across explored space, waking each of them in turn, not into weapons but into arcs, seed banks, shelters built to outlast a species' worst day, scattered deliberately far from any world worth burning, holding within them everything needed to begin again. Knowledge, genetic archives, the accumulated memory of a civilization that intended, however long it took, to still be there when the war finally ended. The builders had never gotten to use it themselves. Whatever enemy had hunted them down had found and destroyed every tomb before the signal could be sent, except, apparently impossibly, this last one which had waited, silent and patient, for someone willing to answer its question honestly enough to be trusted with what it held. "It's not a weapon," Priya said, standing very still in the vast lit stillness, tears on her face that she didn't seem to notice. "It's a lifeboat. It's been a lifeboat this whole time, and we spent 30 years hoping it was a gun." "Then it doesn't matter," Ren said, voice cracking. "We don't have anyone left to save. Earth is gone. The fleets are gone. There's nothing left to put in a lifeboat. Adiz looked at the light around them, at the vast patient structure that had waited for this exact moment across a span of time she could not make herself comprehend, and thought of Ellen Nakamura's last transmission, and the redshifted silence where Sol used to be, and the 11 other tombs scattered through the dark, each one holding whatever fragments of humanity had managed to reach them before the end, colony ships, archive stations, the handful of outposts and settlements humanity had built precisely because they were far from anything worth burning. There's us, she said. There's whoever else made it to the other tombs. There's every colony too small and too far out for the unmaking to have bothered burning yet. It's not nothing, Ren. It's not what we had yesterday. But it's not nothing. Above them, the sound of the enemy reached the threshold chamber. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Boone met them at the door because someone had to, and it was the job he'd signed up for even if nobody had ever written this particular version of it into a contract. He had 4 soldiers left topside dead behind him and no illusions about the 5th minute of whatever came next, but he had also, in the chaos of the retreat, done the one thing that mattered more than his own survival. He had sealed the excavation shaft's inner blast door behind the descent team, buying them time measured in minutes rather than seconds, and he had done it knowing exactly what it meant for his own chances of getting back through it. Go, he told Adiz, when she reached the threshold and saw him standing alone against a door that would not hold much longer. Whatever's in there, whatever you found, send it. That's the mission now. That was always going to be the mission the second the fleet went dark. Tomas, I've got maybe 4 minutes before that door stops mattering, he said, checking his rifle with hands that were perfectly steady, because he had decided, somewhere in the last hour, exactly what kind of man he was going to be for the rest of his life, however short that turned out to be. 4 minutes is enough for you to send a signal. It is not enough for 6 people to get past 40 soldiers. Do the math, Commander. You already know the answer. She did know it. She hated it and she knew it anyway. Get them out, Boone said, and for a moment the calm cracked, just slightly, just enough to show her the fear underneath it. Not fear of dying, she understood later, but fear that it would be for nothing. Make it count. There was no time for the kind of goodbye either of them would have wanted. Adiz gripped his arm once, hard, and then turned back to the light because he was right, and because the only way to honor what he was about to do was to not waste it standing in a doorway grieving it in advance. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Priya sent the signal with 4 minutes to spare, and it took less than 4 seconds to leave. The tomb's core, the vast, lit, silent space at the heart of the structure, did something none of them had words for. It did not glow, exactly, or hum, exactly, but for one impossible instant the entire 2-kilometer mass beneath the ice became, in some sense none of their instruments could measure, awake, and the signal went out from it in every direction at once, keyed to a recognition pattern. 11 other structures across the width of explored space had been waiting patiently, for longer than human history to receive. They felt it more than heard it. A vast, wordless acknowledgement, spreading outward at a speed their physics had no name for, reaching tombs on worlds no human had ever set foot on, in systems whose names existed only in old survey logs, at colonies that had no idea they were sitting on top of anything but bedrock. One by one, faster than light should have allowed, 11 other tombs woke up. The enemy breached the threshold chamber 4 minutes and 11 seconds after Boone sealed the door, which meant he had bought them 11 seconds more than he'd promised, which was, Adiz thought later, exactly the kind of thing he would have found darkly funny if he'd lived to hear the final number. He had not lived. None of them found that out until much later, when Priya finally managed to pull partial data from the outpost's last surviving black box, salvaged weeks afterward from wreckage that had somehow avoided total destruction. A small, stubborn irony, that the enemy who had erased a species so thoroughly had left behind, by accident, the record of the one man who'd bought that species its second chance. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What the 6-5 now survivors of Outpost Alien did next was not, in any way that mattered, heroic. It was simple, mechanical, and utterly without dignity. They ran deeper into the tomb, through passages the structure opened for them as they moved, because whatever intelligence or will or ancient patient purpose lived at its core had apparently decided, in the space of a few minutes, that it owed these 5 people every remaining resource it had. They did not outrun the enemy. Nothing outran the unmaking. That had been proven, decisively and at appalling cost, in the 16 minutes it took to break Earth's orbital defense grid. What the tomb did instead was close behind them. Not a door this time, but the entire structure, drawing the vast bulk of its 2-kilometer mass down and inward like something folding itself for sleep, sealing every passage the enemy might use to reach the 5 humans now curled, exhausted and half in shock, in a chamber at its exact center. The enemy's response, recorded in fragments by instruments that survived what followed and were recovered far too long afterward for the recording to matter to anyone still fighting the war, was to attempt exactly the same thing that had worked at Seoul. Overwhelming, precise, patient bombardment, aimed at cracking open whatever the tomb was protecting. It did not work. The tomb had, after all, been built by a species that had lost this exact fight once already and had spent whatever remained of their existence making sure the next structure like it would not lose the same way twice. The bombardment lasted 4 hours. The tomb held. Eventually, hours or days, nobody in the sealed chamber ever agreed on how long, because time inside the tomb behaved with the same strange patience as everything else about it. The bombardment stopped, and the enemy fleet, unable to break the structure and apparently unwilling to commit further resources to a target that had stopped being worth the cost, withdrew. Adiz Okoro did not feel, in the days that followed, like someone who had won anything. She had lost her homeworld, her fleet, her chain of command, and a man who had bought her survival with the last 4 minutes of his own life, and no amount of context made any of that feel like victory. What she had instead, when Priya finally managed to establish contact with the first of the other awakened tombs, a structure buried on a moon 11 light-years away, guarding a colony of 400 people who had spent the last day watching their own sky burn without understanding why, was something smaller and harder to name. Not everything, not close to everything, but not nothing either. 12 tombs, awake now across the width of what had been human space, each one a seed for what came next. Archives, genetic banks, the patient accumulated knowledge of a species that had refused, at the very last possible moment, to let its story end where its enemy had decided it should. Colonies too small to have been worth burning yet scattered and disconnected, who would spend the coming years learning that they were not, in fact, the last of anything, that somewhere else other survivors were doing exactly what they were doing. Taking inventory, counting the dead, and beginning with whatever they had left to build again. It would take generations to become anything like what had been lost. Adiz understood that with total clarity, standing in the quiet lit center of the structure that had saved her life at the cost of a man she'd never properly thanked. Humanity had lost its homeworld, its capital, its fleets, its government, and by any reasonable accounting, everything that had made it a civilization rather than a scattering of survivors clinging to the dark. But the enemy that had done this, patient, overwhelming, thorough in a way that had broken every other species it had ever hunted down to the last member, had made one mistake at Seoul that Adiz intended to make certain it never got the chance to correct. It had assumed that breaking a species meant destroying its home. It had never imagined that the species might already have learned, from the bones of a civilization far older and far wiser than its own, exactly how to survive being homeless. Somewhere out in the dark, 12 tombs sat quiet and waiting, each one a promise that the war was not, in fact, over, only changed into a shape the unmaking had never planned for and had no doctrine to fight. Adiz looked at the star map Priya had built from the newly connected network, 12 points of light scattered across a darkness that had, until 4 days ago, felt like an ending, and found that the thing rising in her chest, underneath the grief that would take years to properly finish arriving, was something she recognized, cautiously, as the beginning of a plan. Humanity had lost everything. It had not, however, lost the only thing that had ever actually mattered: the stubborn, inconvenient refusal to accept that everything was the same thing as the end.